CEO thought her blind date was just a single dad until an attack revealed his secret heroic past. The gunshot cracked through the restaurant before Elena Marsh even understood what was happening. And in the half-second between the sound and her own scream, the man across the table from her, the quiet, soft-spoken single father she had almost stood up, was already moving, already between her and the danger, already someone she had never met before that moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes hiding in plain sight, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2 so you never miss a story like this one. Elena Marsh had built her company from a card table in a one-bedroom apartment into a logistics empire that moved freight across 4 continents. And in the 11 years it took her to do it, she had forgotten what it felt like to want something just for herself. She was 36 years old, unmarried, and so thoroughly married to her work that her assistant had taken to scheduling her dentist appointments between board calls because Elena would never do it herself. Her mother had been the one to sign her up for the dating app, actually, sliding her phone across the kitchen table during a rare Sunday dinner and saying, with the particular bluntness only mothers are allowed, that money did not keep a person warm at night. Elena had laughed it off, deleted the app twice, and reinstalled it a third time out of something she refused to call loneliness. That was how she found herself, on a Tuesday evening in early spring, sitting at a corner table in a modest Italian restaurant she never would have chosen for herself, waiting for a man named Daniel Reyes. His profile had been almost aggressively ordinary compared to the others. No shirtless gym photos, no humblebrags about a beach house in Cabo, just a picture of him laughing with a little girl on his shoulders and a bio that said simply, single dad, coffee enthusiast, terrible dancer, looking for someone patient. Something about the plainness of it had stopped her thumb mid-scroll. She had swiped right before she could talk herself out of it, and now here she was 20 minutes early, checking her phone for emails she did not need to check. When Daniel walked in, he did not look like a man who belonged in her world. He wore a plain gray button-down that had clearly been ironed by someone in a hurry, and there was a faint callus on his right hand when he shook hers, the kind that came from work with tools rather than keyboards. He apologized for being 3 minutes late, explaining that his daughter Mia had refused to let him leave until he promised to bring home a piece of tiramisu, and there was something so unguarded in the way he said it, so free of performance, that Elena felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in longer than she could remember. He asked about her day and actually waited for the answer. He did not once mention what he did for a living, and when she asked, he simply said he worked in security consulting, and changed the subject to ask what her favorite color had been when she was 7, a question so strange and specific that she laughed out loud before she could stop herself. For the first time in years, Elena forgot to check her phone. She forgot about the merger closing on Thursday, forgot about the board member who had been undermining her for months, forgot even to perform the version of herself that she wore into every room like armor. Daniel talked about Mia with a tenderness that made her throat tighten, about the mother who had left when Mia was 2 and never looked back, about the long nights of teaching himself to braid hair from YouTube videos, and the specific horror of a kindergarten science fair volcano that had erupted 3 days early in his kitchen. He was funny in a self-deprecating way, and kind in a way that seemed to require no effort, and by the time their entrees arrived, Elena realized with something like panic that she was enjoying herself completely without calculation for the first time in years. It was at that exact moment, with her fork halfway to her mouth and Daniel mid-sentence about Mia's insistence that their goldfish could understand English, that the restaurant door burst open and 2 men in ski masks stormed in shouting for everyone to get down, one of them firing a shot into the ceiling to prove he meant it. The room dissolved into chaos. Chairs scraped, glasses shattered, someone screamed near the kitchen, and Elena felt her entire body lock with a fear so total it was almost peaceful. The way people say drowning eventually stops hurting. She had time to register the black eye of the gun swinging toward their table, time to think, absurdly, that she had left the stove on that morning, and then Daniel's hand closed around her wrist and yanked her down and sideways with a speed and precision that did not belong to a man who spent his evenings braiding a 6-year-old's hair. What happened next unfolded in fragments that Elena would spend weeks trying to stitch back together in her memory. Daniel moved like something uncoiling, like a mechanism that had been dormant so long even he seemed startled by its return. He put himself bodily between her and the gunman nearest their table, and when the man raised his weapon toward the terrified hostess cowering by the host stand, Daniel closed the distance in 3 strides, disarmed him with a brutal economy of motion that looked less like a bar fight and more like a demonstration, and had the man face down on the floor with his own weapon trained on him before Elena had even finished processing that he'd moved at all. The second gunman turned, startled, and Daniel's voice changed entirely. Flat, low, carrying an authority that silenced the room more effectively than any gunshot had. He said something Elena didn't catch, some phrase that made the second man's face go the color of old paper, and the man dropped his weapon and put his hands up without another word, as though some part of him recognized exactly what he was looking at and knew better than to test it further. The police arrived within minutes, though to Elena it felt like both an eternity and no time at all. She sat frozen at their overturned table, glass crunching under her shoes, watching paramedics check on a young waiter who'd been grazed by the ceiling shot, watching officers zip-tie the 2 men who had walked in with the confidence of people who did this often and walked out looking like they'd made the worst mistake of their lives. And she watched Daniel, this soft-spoken man who 20 minutes earlier had been telling her about a goldfish named Sir Reginald, speak to the responding officers with a calm, clipped precision that told her everything and nothing at once. One of the younger officers actually straightened when Daniel gave his name, and said something quiet to his partner that Elena couldn't hear, but that made both of them glance back at Daniel with an expression she could only describe as recognition. It was nearly 2 hours later, after statements had been taken and the restaurant had been cleared and Elena sat wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from an ambulance she had refused to enter, that Daniel finally sat down across from her on the curb outside, his hands still faintly trembling now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. She asked him, quietly, who he really was, and for a long moment he simply looked at the street in front of them, at the flashing lights reflected in the wet pavement, before he answered. He told her that before Mia, before the quiet life of school pickups and packed lunches and Saturday morning cartoons, he had spent 9 years as an operator in a special forces unit whose name he still wasn't fully permitted to say aloud, the kind of work that did not appear on any resume and could not be explained at dinner parties. He told her about a rescue mission in a country he wouldn't name, about pulling 3 aid workers out of a compound that should have killed him, about the medal that sat in a drawer at the bottom of his closet because looking at it too often made it hard to breathe. He told her that Mia's mother had not been able to live with the man who came home from that life, the silences, the nights he woke gasping, the way he sometimes flinched at sounds that meant nothing to anyone else, and that when she left, he had made a decision that surprised even himself. He was done. He'd hung it up, taken the security consulting job that let him work mostly from home, and dedicated himself to becoming the kind of father who was there for every single ordinary, unremarkable day, because he had spent too many years missing them and had promised himself and Mia that he would not miss any more. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting, and when he finished, apologizing almost, as though his past were something shameful rather than something extraordinary, she reached over and took his still trembling hand in both of hers. She told him that she had spent 11 years building a company by convincing herself that vulnerability was a liability, that she had learned to read people the way he must have once read a room for exits, always calculating, always in control, and that somewhere in that process she had forgotten how to simply sit across from another person and let herself be seen. She told him that watching him tonight, watching the terror and then the astonishing calm, had not frightened her the way she suspected he feared it would. It had done the opposite. It had shown her a man who had already given so much of himself to protect strangers he would never see again, and who was still, after everything, choosing every single day to come home and braid his daughter's hair. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that real strength often hides behind the quietest, gentlest people. It means more than you know, and it helps this channel keep bringing you stories like Daniel's. In the weeks that followed, Elena found herself rearranging her calendar in ways her assistant had never seen before, blocking out evenings, actually leaving the office before dark, learning the difference between Mia's dinosaur toys with the patience of someone determined not to miss a single detail this time. She met Mia properly 3 weeks after the attack, over ice cream that ended up mostly on the little girl's shirt, and when Mia solemnly informed her that Sir Reginald the goldfish definitely understood English and simply chose not to respond out of shyness, Elena laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes, and realized it was the first time in years she had cried from joy instead of exhaustion. Daniel never fully explained everything about his past, and she never asked him to. Some doors, she understood now, did not need to be thrown fully open to be trusted, only left unlocked. What mattered was not the metal in his closet drawer or the classified missions he could never fully describe, but the man who tucked his daughter in every night and had, without hesitation, put his body between a stranger and a bullet because that was simply who he was, hero's title or not. Before we go, I want to ask you for something small. If you have ever met someone who turned out to be far more than they first appeared, someone whose quiet kindness hid a strength you never expected, type the word hero in the comments below so we know you're out there, and so Daniel and everyone like him knows that their quiet courage does not go unnoticed. 6 months after that Tuesday night dinner that was never supposed to change anything, Elena stood in the doorway of Daniel's small kitchen watching him attempt, badly, to braid Mia's hair before school while the little girl narrated a complicated story about a unicorn who ran a bakery, and she understood with a certainty that had nothing to do with boardrooms or acquisitions that she had found something no merger, no empire, no amount of success had ever given her. She had gone looking for a distraction from her mother's nagging and a single evening of company, and instead she had found a man who had already saved lives she would never know about, and who was, in that ordinary kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday, quietly, unremarkably saving hers too. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and remember that the people who love the loudest are so often the ones who learned, the hard way, exactly how much silence can cost.